Welcome everyone to another edition here of BizzTalk Africa. I'm the host, Jason Schuster, representing BizzTech, and my co-host, Vidya Mike from Questa Solutions. And we're really excited today to have Darren Franks. And Darren is the co-founder and CEO of Talent in the Cloud International. He's a fintech expert and does a lot of work in the African markets. And today we're discussing, the topic is the challenge for fintechs when entering the African market. I honestly can't think of a better guest for this topic than Darren. So really excited to hear from him. Darren, can you take just a few minutes, tell the audience who you are, a little bit about your background, a little bit about your company, and then we'll get into the discussion.
Sure. Yeah. Well, listen, guys, thank you so much for having me on. As I said to you, I've been looking forward to this since you guys reached out. So a bit about me. I said Darren Franks. I've been in the world of staffing for 22 years, I think it is now. And originally in the UK, as you could probably hear from my accent, and moved to Dubai in 2007. I was there for 6 or 7 years. Then moved to Africa. So I've been living in South Africa since 2013, working on the continent for about 10 years. I set up Talent in the Cloud 5 years ago. Actually, it's our 5th year anniversary last week. So
fantastic.
It was a big milestone for us. And the business is focused solely on emerging markets, but it's fintech in emerging markets. So we work across the continent. We do some work in Europe as well, but predominantly Africa. So to date, we've covered 17 countries. So we've put leaders into 17 countries in Africa. We do a lot of work in gender diversity as well. So 43% of the leaders we placed, certainly in 2019, were women, which we're super proud of. And I also serve on a couple of boards. I do some advisory work for some early stage FinTechs. I also invest in some early stage FinTechs as well. And FinTech has basically been my life for the last 6 or 7 years. So yeah, super excited to be here. I think, talking about expanding into Africa, clearly I'm not African, and I came into Africa and wouldn't say conquered it by any stretch of the imagination, but I've certainly learned a hell of a lot over the last 7, 8 years. Operating a business here on the continent. A lot of our clients are international companies that again are got presence here on the continent, as well as obviously a lot of homegrown companies here as well. So that's a bit about me.
Fantastic, Darren. A quick question before I let Viddy loose, because she's going to have all kinds of questions for you. But why fintech? I mean, you coming from staffing, and then why fintech? Yeah. What's drawn you and into fintech? And I can tell that that's something that you're passionate about and have now developed expertise. But why fintech? Why not something else? Why not SaaS, or I don't know?
Yeah. Jason, I would love to tell you that I engaged with McKinsey's and EY, and I did a huge study on the continent and looked at all the incoming, but I didn't. I'd be lying to you. I genuinely, a very blotted story, but when I was sort of exiting my last business, I was sitting in my garage looking for something to do, and I got a call from someone that I'd met a few years ago in Nairobi. He called me and said, listen, I've just joined this new payments business as a CFO. We've had some private equity funding and we need to expand across the continent in the next 18 months. And I said, okay, that's great, but I don't do staffing anymore, because I'd hung up my staffing boots, right? And he said to me, no, listen, come over to Nairobi, meet the team, at least give us the strategy of how you would go about doing this, because there was countries that this business had never operated in, let alone set foot in. So off I trotted to Nairobi. To cut a long story short, and ended up designing a talent acquisition program for this group, and this is now DPO Group, who have just been acquired by Network International. And when I came back after my sort of trip, I kind of went, well, okay, looks like I'm back in the world of staffing, but if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it very, very differently. I don't want another sort of Me Too staffing business, of which there are tens of thousands, right? And I wanted to pick a niche and pick something or a niche, if there's anyone from the US listening in. And I wanted to be, there you go. I got a brownie point there, didn't I? So then, we want to be specific, and actually a sector that was clearly, doing something great was payments. And I got some seed investment for the business, and we sat down as a sort of group and said, right, what are we going to do? Where are we going to focus? And I think it was about a half an hour conversation, and we went, let's just do fintech, right? It sounds pretty cool. There was obviously a little bit more discussion, but
Sure.
if I look back in my career, certainly in the Middle East, most of the clients I was working with were actually fintechs before they even became sexy and called fintechs, right? They were just, financial services companies, and I was essentially providing technology staff to these organizations. So it was fintech before it was fintech, and I've just grown, very, very attached to it. It's hugely exciting, so innovative, and the people in fintech are just amazing to deal with, right? And I'm not going to start drawing comparisons against, people that are working in, core banking or other parts of the sector. But, fintech people generally are very cool, certainly on the African continent anyway.
That's pretty cool. I would imagine that fintech people are generally different than your typical high finance, investment bankers and Wall Street folks. But, anyways.
They certainly are.
I actually
Awesome.
think they're merging, because when fintech started to take off, and the way it has taken off, especially with the pandemic, and people need to have connectivity, and the work that you're doing, Darren, is so critical, sort of bringing certain people who didn't have access to this before, they now have access. I think people in the corporate world are seeing what a huge impact it's having. And actually, using technology to reach a wider audience is so critical. So even, the big ones, they're all thinking, we have to get onto this because this is where it's at. So Darren, you made a good decision in your garage.
It wasn't a bad one. I've made worse, right? And especially over the last 12, 18 months since, the pandemic, if there was one sector that's been resilient, and that's been fintech, if not even resilient, is probably the wrong word. It's, it's had a positive effect on that industry.
At the end of the day, what never changes? People still need to buy, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't change. Now you actually see Meditech starting to take off because of what we have. It's always, something that make these things actually happen. But fintech, you have no choice. What has been your biggest challenge?
What's been my biggest challenge? Wow.
And maybe make it more specific. What's been your biggest challenge specific to Africa? Because it's obviously there's different challenges for fintech in different parts of the world, but what's the biggest challenge that you've faced specifically for the African market?
So I think it's important, just for clarity's sake, is that, my business, we're not a fintech. We provide services to fintechs. Okay. So yes. Just to make that very clear. So I'll talk from my perspective, but I can also talk from our customers' perspective as well, who are all fintechs. I think from our perspective, just the scale, just the size of the continent. And, one thing that always makes me laugh, whenever I have a conversation with, an overseas organization that's looking to come into Africa, and they go, we're going to expand into Africa. And you go, great, which country? And they go, Africa. You go, nah, listen, you need to be a little bit more specific, right? It's quite a big place. 54 countries and, nearly 2,000 languages. You need to be a little bit more specific. So I think, remaining focused is one big challenge, because there are so many opportunities. I mean, we probably say no to more opportunities than we say yes to, and I don't mean that in an arrogant way, but we have oil and gas companies, we have petrochemical companies, we have medtech, we have insurtech, all of these types of organizations who come to say, can you assist? And we have to be, we have to stick to our guns and actually, it's not our sector. That's not what we're great at. We're focusing on fintech, and there's always a part of you that goes, oh, maybe just once, but no. So I think that's a challenge. I think that from our clients' perspective, probably their biggest challenge on the continent is regulation. Working with regulators, obviously, depending on what subsect of fintech they're in. Some require quite light regulatory controls. Other is pretty heavy. So I think that's a big challenge as well. And people, right? Staffing. I mean, that's why I've set up this business, is finding talent on the continent. With such a huge continent, it's very challenging. I don't believe there's a skills gap here in Africa. And I've had many debates either online or with various people over the years about this. people just don't necessarily know how to find that talent, and that's obviously where we come in. So I don't think there's a talent shortage at all. It's just people don't know where to look.
It's more a visibility issue then.
Yeah, visibility is one. I think just understanding how sort of talent acquisition or hiring in general can be done, arguably should be done. Posting a job on a job board isn't going to cut it these days. It's just, the world has changed. So I think there's a big gap in the market, which is where we find ourselves.
And that's because of the infancy of where it is, right? If you look at the UK, for example, you have so many groups like yourself actually doing stuff. So over time, it's gotten a little bit more mature. But because of where you are and the opportunities and probably speed at which things are changing, that, the need for people with certain skill sets and how you get them, the database of collecting that information is still developing.
Absolutely, couldn't agree with you more. If you go to the UK or even the US, every staffing firm that used to do, technology or financial services now does fintech, right? And that's fine for a mature market, but for a market such as Africa, and again, I hate using that sort of that phrase for Africa because it's so vast. But if you look at places like Kenya or Ghana or Nigeria, South Africa or Egypt, they're all their own markets and very, very different. But strategies need to change. The whole world of staffing has changed, certainly since COVID as well, right? So what it's allowed, certainly fintechs here on the continent, is now they can effectively hire, and they're not bound to their location, right? So they're in Johannesburg, for example. They're not bound to just hiring in Johannesburg, or if they're in Lagos, where the traffic is just mind-blowing, right? People would travel like 2.5 hours to get to work, and 2.5 hours, back from work, sitting in the car for 5 hours a day is crazy. So, the kind of the limitations of talent really has been eradicated to some degree. The free trade zone that's coming up, hopefully when that gets rolled out, I think when people do want to move, because there's always going to be that sort of mobility in Africa, hopefully that will make things a lot easier, without having visas and what have you. The challenge, however, for most companies, a large number of companies on the continent, is the virtual brain drain. Okay, so it's typically if you go to you're in London and you go to a street called Harley Street, which is where all the sort of clinics are, private clinics, and the medical specialists, I bet my bottom dollar that you're going to come across a South African, right? Because a lot of the doctors, a lot of the great doctors here in South Africa have moved over, have emigrated to the UK. What we're seeing now, certainly in the fintech world, is there's lots of fintechs in Europe and the US that are now looking at Africa going, you know what, historically it's been really difficult to hire talent because of visas and it's upheaval and families, and it's expensive and it's quite risky. Whereas now they're going, actually, I'm based in Silicon Valley and I've got people working in New Jersey, I've got people working in Minnesota, or I've got people working in London. Why not just have people working in Africa as well? It makes no difference. So what African fintechs are finding is that actually they're not now competing with their competitors, local competitors. They're now competing on an international stage. So yeah, that's a concern. I think that's one big issue that's probably not going to go away anytime soon.
I actually think it's a huge opportunity at the same time, right? It's quite exciting because what you now have is a real interesting sort of scenario where you have Africa, whilst there's some areas that have a lot of congestion, there's a lot of land, there's a vast amount of space for development. So you're gonna probably find businesses thinking, you know what, we're gonna relocate. And then it becomes very exciting because you have people outside thinking, I want to go and watch a safari, I want to live somewhere beautiful, and we might relocate. And I think we're seeing that.
I'm in the process of doing that myself, right? I'm in Cape Town at the moment, and 3 weeks' time, I'm going to be further down the east coast and in a place called Knysna, which is a bit of a sort of holiday town. Because why not?
It beats Croydon, doesn't it?
Yeah, I've got to be honest, it does a little bit. Perhaps the Wi-Fi is not as great, but other than that, I can't really think of too many comparisons. But yeah, I mean, and I think that's Same in the UK. It's the same in, I guess, in all major cities where people are going, hang on, do I really need to be in this rat race? Jumping on the tube or jumping on the subway and, schlapping all the way into the town every day. Well, actually, I can do my
quality
job.
of life. Absolutely. So what have you been seeing and if there's companies looking to come into Africa, right? And they're like, call you up and say, Darren, we're looking to sort of come in.
Yep.
What advice would you give them from, so they've selected where they're going to be, etc. In terms of actually structuring their people, what advice would you give them? And how long before they arrive should they start with that process?
Okay, well, I think the first thing is you need to hyper-localize your strategy. Okay, that's the first thing. So, if you are looking at coming into the market, decide which country, then decide what the demographics are of what you're, who you're selling to. That's really, really important. And then understand the competitive landscape as well. And then obviously all the regulatory side, and I'll take that as kind of given. So I think from a people perspective, and what I've learned over the years, and again, certainly in places like Kenya, it's not just about, I'm going to hire a Kenyan to go and do business development for me, but it's more detailed than that. So who are you selling to? What tribe typically is your customer base, right? And that's going to make a big difference. So if I get someone from a different tribe, they're going to really struggle to sell into telco, or they're going to really struggle to sell into banking, whatever it may be. So you have to understand the market, because it might be a great person, but you're sending them up to fail, because they're going to really, really struggle. So that's certainly one consideration. Secondly, I think you should always, as a business leaders or whoever's running this initiative of global expansion, make the effort in coming over and living in the country for a period of time. And when I say living in the country, I don't mean staying in a 5-star hotel and going on safari every 2 weeks, right? Or every week. That's not living in the country. That's being a tourist. You need to really just get into a network. Again, that's a really important thing. We'll come on to that in a second, but embed yourself within the culture, understand what the challenges are. If you're looking to solve financial inclusion, and you're used to living in, I don't know, Silicon Valley or, Hampstead in London or Paris, you're not going to really understand what financial inclusion is unless you have gone, and you've been around, the various areas in Africa where there is, huge amounts of poverty. I mean, I got taken a couple of years ago around, one of these, we call them here in townships in South Africa. And, the scale of this was just mind blowing. And to see, tiny children running around rummaging through, waste effectively to find scraps to it. I mean, it's heart wrenching. It really is heart wrenching. But unless you've done that, I don't think you'll ever really understand Africa, or some of the challenges in Africa. Of course, you've got Nairobi and you've got Lagos and you've got, Accra and you've got Cape Town and you've got all these lovely cities, okay, that are really cosmopolitan, but that's not really Africa, if I can say that. Right. So that would be my advice. You have to make the decision to come over. Don't stay in a 5-star hotel. Make sure you're sort of living the life. I think with the other point I mentioned, the network, so important. Get to know people. Again, there are so many networks these days, whether it be on the likes of LinkedIn or whether it be, Twitter is massive in Africa, by the way, more so than LinkedIn. There are so many different communities. Again, if you're coming from US or the UK, speak to your consulate, get some advice. That's certainly what I did when I first came to South Africa. I met with the British consulate and the trade bodies and just started building relationships, getting into business communities. Again, the way of conducting business across the continent is so different. If you think you're going to come and start selling from day one, people aren't going to buy from you. I can promise you that. Even if you've got the greatest bit of tech, it's about trust, it's about relationships, and it takes a long time. It really does. So that would be my advice.
That is such an eye-opener. Thank you for that.
It's a big eye-opener, and almost, from what you're saying, it sounds like it sounds like local fintechs would have a significant advantage over foreign fintechs trying to come in, and even if they're staffing local, they're kind of at a disadvantage. So I guess what would be your advice to a local fintech versus a foreign fintech coming in trying to penetrate the market?
I think the challenge that some of the local fintechs have is expanding outside of their border. Right, however crazy that sounds, actually, it's probably more challenging for a Nigerian company. Well, I say that there are obviously some exceptions which I'll come on to, but you know, for a Nigerian company to come into South Africa is actually very challenging. For a Kenyan company to move into Ghana, for example, is quite challenging. Now, clearly, there are case studies where people have overcome that. So we look at Flutterwave, who have just raised the Series C. We look at Paystack, who obviously have been acquired by Stripe. We look at DPO Group, who've been acquired by Network International. But as you can see, there's a trend, right? They've had foreign investment. So they've had foreign investment and a big amount of investment. And that, money goes a long way. $170 million Series C in Africa is the equivalent probably to $500 million in the States, right? Because money goes so much further. So, you might look and go, that's quite a small raise for a fintech. And arguably it probably is if you're in a more developed market. But here on the continent, it goes a long way. So that's a challenge. How do local or homegrown fintechs overcome that? I'm not saying you have to go out and get funding at all. But you would use the same strategy as I've just explained for international companies coming in. If you're a Kenyan and you want to, or a Kenyan-based company, you want to sell into Tanzania, it's really difficult. Really, really difficult. It's a bit like the Brits selling into France, right? We always struggle. There's history, right? I'm not going to go into politics.
Leave the cod wars out.
I'm going to leave that. Yeah. Listen,
leave it aside.
I'm not going to open that can of worms.
No.
Not on a Friday afternoon. So, I think there are always going to be those challenges. And what I would say to a Kenyan company who's moving into Tanzania, make sure you hire the right people in Tanzania. Make sure you do that and do that right. I think, there is still, and again, I mean this with the greatest respect to, us as foreigners coming into Africa, we sometimes think that, we come from the developed world and we know it all. That's the wrong attitude, and I learned this very early on when I was in the Middle East. It's exactly the same. If you come into the Middle East and go, listen, we're from the West and we know how it's done, you're going to last 5 minutes. You will literally last 5 minutes. So I think, being humble, being honest, being transparent, and being authentic are probably the 4 key traits anyone has to have coming onto the continent. If you don't have those, you will get swallowed up and spat out.
That is great advice. Absolutely great advice.
Wow.
Does your company also help in terms of training as well and development of staff?
We don't. There you go. Next question. No, I'm joking. So what we do is we partner with people that do. So we've got the Digital Frontiers Institute, who are based here in Cape Town. We've partnered with them. So whenever there's a potential to, or a client comes to say, listen, we need some training in DeFi, or we need some training in, financial inclusion or blockchain, then we would ask a partner, because that's their specialist area.
Right.
So we would always bring in, and as we do for various other parts of the business as well, we get asked so many times about funding, can you help us get funding? Well, yeah, I've got a network and potentially I can open up a few conversations, but actually here's kind of the VCs, or here's the incubators you want to start with, or, this is where to go. So we kind of see ourselves as a bit of a sort of ecosystem connector. We kind of sit in the middle and we can join the dots and help people out. And, again, that's another thing for Africa.
It's great, Darren, because we come full circle to where you started, which was basically you set your goal, you stay in your lane, and you focus to actually be very, very successful. If you don't do something, that's all right. You have partners who do it. And that's a great approach, right? And I think you guys have grown. Now you're 5 years, you've seen considerable growth, and you will continue to do so. There's a lot of demand, and your trajectory might change later on, but that focal point, and I suppose for companies coming in and people coming in, and even African companies that are growing, it's about having that vision and that target and staying towards it, right?
It is. And guys, listen, I have to be honest. And I say this a lot, and I promise you they're not my only customer, but DPO Group, when I first started working with them, they were 23, 24 people. They're now, 400 or something, and have made numerous acquisitions, private equity funding. But the CEO, Darren, who I've obviously, built a very close relationship with over the years, someone like that, who I've just seen being absolutely laser focused in everything he does, has been an inspiration to me. And I'm again, I'm kind of a humble and honest guy, and without looking up to someone like him as effectively a role model, right? I mean, I wouldn't class him as a mentor, but as a role model, to go, wow, this guy's only a few years older than me, but how focused he is on the goal that he wants to achieve, and not getting distracted by all the other opportunities that come up, because they do, right? I mean, I could go and hire a couple of people to do training and then start doing training, or we could then go and do something e-commerce based, but we have to stay focused. So yeah, I think that's
that
a
is
testament to
amazing. Absolutely.
Like
it's an amazing sort of, how you get to where you get to. It's great advice for people who are there and people who are coming in. Seriously, it's been wonderful chatting to you on this.
Well, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And Darren, just kind of, maybe another minute or two, just kind of final thoughts and advice for anyone trying to bring fintech to Africa, or really scale up their fintech in Africa. They're trying to do, besides, of course, calling you and getting help from you with staffing, right?
Yeah.
And but yeah, again, just kind of, there's so many, right? There's so many fintech startups, and I know that Africa is a huge fintech hub. There's every time I get on LinkedIn, I'm seeing someone talking about this fintech or that fintech, but payments and finance, it's a really big topic, especially things like cryptocurrency is huge in Africa as well. And so just kind of your final thoughts on this that you want to leave with the audience.
The opportunities across the continent are vast, right? They are huge. Look at Nigeria, 60 million people unbanked. I'm not talking partly banked, I'm talking completely unbanked. 60 million unbanked, right? And that's one country. There's 53 others. My advice would be, understand your market, really understand what you're trying to solve. If your product or service doesn't solve a problem, it's not right for the continent. There are so many challenges here, but also the challenges that you may see in your home markets are likely to be very, very different. If you've got an app that works amazingly in the Netherlands, it doesn't mean it's going to work in Africa. It doesn't mean you can just pick it up and go, oh, well, there's 60 million people here that could use it. There are so many different challenges. Infrastructure is a massive one. Cost of data is still very, very high. Mobile phone penetration, whilst very high, it's not necessarily smartphone penetration, albeit we are seeing a significant ramping of that. So if you've got a very cool app that only works on iOS, i.e. something like Clubhouse, you've alienated pretty much the entire continent, other than maybe a fraction of a percent, because if people do have smartphones, it tends to be Android. And the Android phones are not going to be the latest Samsung or LG. They're going to be probably refurbished phones from China, because there's a massive market for that. So if you have something that's built on the latest software and uses the latest tools and has to have geotagging, or has to have movement for virtual reality, not going to work. You need to rethink the strategy very, very carefully. I've seen a lot of companies come in and just try and pick up a product and dump it on the continent. Never works. Well, I've never seen it work.
Wow, that's really, really good advice.
Absolutely.
Wow, Darren, thanks so much. I really appreciate it. And also, Vidya, as always, just coming with the great questions. And Darren, thank you for taking your time to be here, man. This was awesome. Well, I think maybe we can have you on again, here in a little bit, a couple months from now or something like that. Just we're seeing a lot of traction with this show already. And I know that, people really want to learn. People want to understand the African market, and you're one of those people that can help people navigate it. So thanks so much. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Massive eye opener. Thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure.
And Jason, always a pleasure.
Thanks, Vinny. You too. All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a great
Bye.
day. Bye-bye.